There is a particular kind of cruelty in the details of this case, not the cruelty of violence, though there is that too, but the cruelty of performance, of a woman who, by the time investigators began closing in, had already given television interviews, published a book, held a launch party, and built an entire public identity around being a grieving widow. The cruelty of looking directly into a camera and talking about your dead husband's legacy, while, according to prosecutors, you are the reason he is dead. This is the story of Kouri and Eric Richins. Of a marriage built on money neither of them had enough of, on ambition that outran its foundation, and on a woman who, if the prosecution is right, decided that the fastest path out of debt was through her husband's bedroom, and that the fastest path to absolution was a children's book. It is one of the most audacious true crime stories in America right now. And the trial is happening as you watch this video. Park City, Utah is not the kind of place where you expect to find financial desperation. It is ski country, the kind of town that hosts the Sundance Film Festival, that has more restaurants per capita than most American cities twice its size, that sits at an altitude where the air is thin and the real estate prices are not. Eric Richins fit into that world in the way that self-made men sometimes do, not by inheritance, but by work. He ran a successful stonemasonry business, the kind of skilled trade that in a wealthy mountain town with constant construction and renovation is essentially recession-proof. He was 39 years old, physically fit, with no history of substance abuse of any kind. He had 3 young sons, aged 5, 7, and 9 at the time of his death. He was, by every account from his friends and family, a good father and a man who had built something real. Kouri was different, louder, more ambitious, more interested in the appearance of success than in the slow accumulation of it. She ran a real estate investment company, flipping houses, managing properties, chasing deals, and she was, according to prosecutors and the evidence they have presented, absolutely drowning. Her business was bleeding money. She had submitted falsified bank statements on mortgage loan applications. She had committed money laundering. She had issued bad checks. She was facing what prosecutors described as total financial collapse, the kind of collapse that, in Park City, in a social world built on the optics of wealth, would have meant not just bankruptcy, but complete humiliation. And there was something else, something that, once you know it, reframes every subsequent event in this story. Kouri Richins was in love with someone else. His name is not important to the core of the prosecution's case, but his testimony is. Text messages recovered by investigators show that by early 2022, Kouri was actively planning a future with another man. On February 15, 2022, the day after Valentine's Day, she sent him a message asking if he would marry her if she were divorced. He said yes. Now hold that date in your mind. Because what allegedly happened on February 14th, Valentine's Day itself, is the moment this case truly begins. According to prosecutors, Kouri had, in early February 2022, purchased fentanyl pills from her housekeeper. The housekeeper, Carmen Lauber, testified at trial that Kouri asked her to acquire the substance on 4 separate occasions, giving her permission to buy what Lauber believed to be fentanyl from a dealer named Robert Crozier. The first purchase was made on February 11th, just days before Valentine's Day. On the morning of Valentine's Day, Kouri left the house to meet her boyfriend. Before she left, she made her husband a sandwich and left it for him with a note. Eric Richins ate a bite of that sandwich. Within hours, he was texting Kouri to say he felt like he was going to die. He broke out in hives. He told a friend he believed he had been poisoned. He used his son's EpiPen to manage the reaction. He took Benadryl. He survived, but barely, and without fully understanding what had happened to him. 2 weeks later, he was dead. Here's what I want you to think about right now, before we go any further. Eric Richins survived February 14th. He felt sick enough that he told a friend he thought his wife had tried to poison him. And yet, he stayed. He did not leave. He did not file a police report. He did not call a doctor and demand answers. Why? We don't know completely. His defense attorney said at trial that friends described the couple as being the happiest they had ever seen them in those final weeks. Maybe Eric dismissed his own instincts. Maybe he loved her too much to believe what his body was telling him. Maybe he decided it was a paranoid thought and moved on. We all dismiss things we don't want to believe. On the evening of March 3rd, 2022, Kouri brought cocktails upstairs to the master bedroom of their home in Kamas, Utah. a small town just outside Park City. She told Eric she wanted to celebrate a success she'd had with her real estate business. They had drinks together. They were, by her account, happy. At around 9:30 p.m., Kouri told investigators that one of their sons was having bad dreams, so she went to sleep in his room. She returned to the master bedroom at approximately 3:15 in the morning. Eric Richins was lying in their bed, cold, not breathing. She called 911 at 3:21 a.m. When the dispatcher asked her to describe what she found, she said, "I turned over, like to put my arm around Eric, and he was just cold. Like it was like putting your arm over a cement brick." First responders arrived quickly. They could not revive him. Eric Richins was pronounced dead. He was 39 years old. The initial conclusion, pending autopsy, was that this was an unexpected death. A healthy man, no known medical conditions, no history of drug use, dead in his bed. Tragic. Inexplicable. The kind of thing that happens and leaves families with no framework to understand it. The autopsy gave them a framework. It was not one anyone wanted. The medical examiner found fentanyl in Eric's system at approximately 5 times the lethal dosage. Not a trace, not an amount consistent with accidental exposure. 5 times the lethal dose of one of the most powerful synthetic opioids in existence, in a man who had never used drugs in his life. This was not an overdose. This was a killing. Let me stop here and ask you a question that I think gets to the psychological core of this case. What does it take to go back into a room and lie down next to someone you have just poisoned and wait for them to die? To get up in the morning, call 911, perform grief for the paramedics and the police, and eventually the cameras? What kind of distance does a person have to create between themselves and their own actions to be capable of that? I'm not asking rhetorically. I'm asking because I think the answer tells us something important. Not just about Kouri Richins, but about how people who commit calculated crimes manage to look so completely normal while doing it. There is a dissociation required, a compartmentalization so complete that the person performing grief has, in some functional sense, separated themselves from the person who caused it. It is not madness. It is, in many ways, more frightening than madness. It is control. The investigation moved slowly at first. There was no immediate arrest. Investigators were building a case, following threads, and, crucially, watching what Kouri did in the months after Eric's death. What she did was remarkable. She filed a claim against Eric's estate almost immediately. There was a complication. Eric, it turned out, had quietly set up a trust in 2020, making his sister the trustee and beneficiary of all his assets, including the house. He had done this, according to testimony, because Kouri had misused her power of attorney to take out a $250,000 line of credit in his name without his knowledge. Eric had consulted a divorce attorney that same year. He had not filed, but he had protected himself. Kouri did not know about the trust until after his death. When she found out, she contested it. She also, according to prosecutors, had taken out life insurance policies on Eric, totaling more than $2 million, including at least one policy that she allegedly applied for using his forged signature. One of those policies had gone into effect in February 2022, just weeks before his death. And then, in March 2023, 1 year after Eric died, Kouri published a children's book. The book is called Are You With Me? It follows a young boy trying to cope with the death of his father. It features an illustration of a father with angel wings watching over his son. It is, and this is important to say clearly, a real book, self-published, available for purchase, with Kouri Richins listed as the author. On April 6, 2023, she appeared on a local television lifestyle program called Good Things Utah to promote it. She talked about Eric's death. She said it had taken them all by shock. She said his presence was still with them, just in a different way. She smiled. She was composed. She was a grieving mother, turning her pain into something her children could hold in their hands. 1 month later, she was arrested for his murder. The juxtaposition is so extreme that it almost doesn't need commentary. A woman promotes a grief book for children about the father she is accused of killing on morning television, 1 month before she is charged with his murder. If you wrote this as fiction, an editor would tell you it was too on the nose. It was not fiction. The charges came on May 8, 2023. Aggravated murder, attempted criminal homicide, for the Valentine's Day sandwich, insurance fraud, forgery. Kouri Richins pleaded not guilty to all of it. She has maintained her innocence from the moment of her arrest to this day. Bail was denied. She has been sitting in the Summit County Jail since May 2023, and while she was in that jail, something happened that prosecutors would later describe as one of the most significant pieces of evidence in the entire case. A letter was found hidden in a book in her jail cell, 6 pages long, addressed to her mother, titled, "And this is the detail that stops people cold, walk the dog." The letter, according to prosecutors, was not a personal note. It was a script, a set of instructions for how her family members should testify falsely on her behalf. It suggested that Eric had purchased the fentanyl himself from Mexico, and that his death was an accidental overdose. It coached her brother on what to say and what not to say. It was, in the prosecution's framing, a document that revealed consciousness of guilt as clearly as any piece of evidence they had. Kouri's defense said the letter was part of a fictional novel she was writing, that it was creative writing, not a witness-tampering document, that using it as evidence violated her rights. The judge allowed it. The jury will decide what it means. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from. City, state, country. I want to see this community from everywhere. And if this is your first time on Close Circle Crime Stories, this is what we do. Every week we go deep on the cases that deserve more light than they've gotten. If that's your kind of content, hit subscribe. It genuinely makes a difference. The trial began on February 23rd, 2026. It is happening right now. As you watch this video, a jury in Summit County, Utah, is hearing testimony about the night Eric Richins died, about the fentanyl in his body, about the texts and the insurance policies and the book and the letter in the jail cell. Here is what the prosecution has built its case on, and it is worth understanding the full architecture of it. First, the toxicology. Eric Richins had 5 times the lethal dose of fentanyl in his system. He had no history of drug use. There is no plausible, innocent explanation for how that amount of an illicit synthetic opioid ends up in a non-drug using man's body. The medical examiner testified that in his professional opinion, Eric was given the fentanyl by someone else. Second, the prior attempt, the Valentine's Day sandwich 2 weeks before Eric's death. Eric's own words to a friend that he believed his wife had tried to poison him. His physical symptoms consistent with fentanyl exposure. The timeline of Kouri purchasing pills from her housekeeper on February 11th and the sandwich happening on February 14th. Third, the motive, documented in her own words, text messages to her boyfriend declaring her love and asking if he would marry her. Financial records showing her business was collapsing. Insurance policies worth over $2 million, at least one taken out with a forged signature weeks before Eric died. The trust Eric had set up specifically because he didn't trust her with his money. Fourth, the behavior after death. The immediate filing against Eric's estate, the book, the television interview, the internet search history investigators recovered, which included the phrases, "Women Utah prison," and "Can cops force you to do a lie detector test?" And fifth, the walk the dog letter, coaching family members on false testimony from inside a jail cell. That is the prosecution's case. It is not circumstantial in any lightweight sense. It is a documented pattern of behavior across months, before and after the death, that taken together paints a portrait of premeditation. But here is where this case gets genuinely complicated. Because the defense is not without ammunition, the central weakness in the prosecution's case, and the defense has identified it clearly, is the chain of custody for the fentanyl itself. The housekeeper, Carmen Lauber, testified that she purchased pills from Robert Crozier and gave them to Kouri. But Robert Crozier, in a 2024 statement to investigators, said he did not sell fentanyl, that he sold a different drug, not fentanyl. He said he may have sold Lauber pills on 1 or 2 occasions, but not fentanyl. The defense put it bluntly in a court filing. If the state cannot place fentanyl in the hands of the defendant, the state has no case. The prosecution countered that Crozier's new statement isn't credible, that it contradicts his earlier account and represents an attempt to distance himself from a murder prosecution. An undercover narcotics detective testified that street pills commonly sold as Roxy's are regularly laced with fentanyl. The implication: Lauber bought what she thought were oxycodone pills. They contained fentanyl, and Kouri got what she was looking for, whether or not anyone knew exactly what it was. The jury will have to decide which version of that story they believe. And that decision, the question of whether fentanyl can actually be placed in Kouri Richins' hands on a specific date, may be the fulcrum on which the entire verdict turns. There is another thread in this case that I think deserves more attention than it has gotten, and it is the one that tells us the most about the person at the center of it. After her arrest, while sitting in jail, Kouri Richins gave recorded interviews to NBC's Dateline. In those recordings, she said, "I'm anxious to prove my innocence. I'm anxious to get to trial, and I'm ready to give this one heck of a fight. You took an innocent mom away from her babies, and this means war." There is something worth examining in the grammar of that statement. You took an innocent mom away from her babies, the passive construction, the framing of herself as the victim, not Eric's family, who lost a husband and a father, not her sons, who lost their dad. Kouri Richins, sitting in a jail cell she was placed in by the legal system, describing herself as the one who has been taken. The defense would say that is how an innocent person sounds, someone who has been wrongly accused, who is furious and frightened, and fighting for her life. That anger is not evidence of guilt. It is evidence of a human being responding to the worst accusation imaginable. And they are not entirely wrong about that. People who are innocent do sound like that. The performance of innocence and the reality of innocence can look identical from the outside. But here is what I keep coming back to. Eric Richins told a friend he thought his wife was trying to poison him. He told his friend that after eating a sandwich she made him on Valentine's Day, he felt like he was going to die. He survived that day, he stayed, and 2 weeks later, he was dead. That story, the sandwich, the symptoms, the warning that was never acted on, is the emotional core of this prosecution. Not the insurance policies, not the forged signatures, not even the book. It is the fact that Eric Richins had, in some corner of his mind, already considered the possibility that his wife might kill him, and then she did. Here is where I land on this case. And as always, I want to be honest about what I know, what I'm inferring, and where genuine uncertainty lives. The financial motive is documented and undeniable. Kouri Richins was facing collapse. She was in love with someone else. She had taken out insurance policies on her husband, including one that prosecutors say involved a forged signature. These are not rumors. They are evidence admitted at trial. The fentanyl in Eric's body is documented and undeniable. 5 times the lethal dose in a man who had never used drugs. The medical examiner's conclusion that someone gave it to him is professional opinion, but it is grounded in the toxicology. What is contested is the link between those two realities, the actual delivery mechanism, whether Kouri can be proven to have obtained fentanyl specifically, and whether she can be proven to have placed it in Eric's drink on the night of March 3rd. The chain from drug dealer to housekeeper to Kouri to Moscow Mule is the weakest link in the prosecution's chain, and the defense is pulling on it hard. But I want to say something about the walk the dog letter that I think is underappreciated in most of the coverage of this case. When you hide a document in a book in your jail cell, and that document coaches your family members on how to testify falsely, and the narrative in that document is that your husband bought the drugs himself from Mexico, you are not engaging in creative writing. You are engineering an alternative truth. You are trying to construct, from inside a jail, the story that will save you. Innocent people do not do that. Innocent people tell their family members to tell the truth because the truth is what will set them free. The construction of false testimony is the behavior of someone who knows that the truth, unchallenged, leads to conviction. That letter is, in my view, the most significant single piece of evidence in this entire case. Not the fentanyl, not the insurance, not the book, the letter. I want to take a moment to talk about Eric Richins' family, because I think in the noise of the legal proceedings and the media coverage, the actual human loss here can get obscured. Eric was 39 years old. He had 3 sons, 5, 7, and 9 years old when their father died. Those boys are now 8, 10, and 12. They have grown up without a father. Whatever the outcome of this trial, that fact does not change. Eric's sister has been the trustee of his estate, fighting to protect what he built for his sons, while simultaneously watching her brother's death become a true crime story, a courtroom proceeding, a YouTube video. His friends have testified about him. The forensic details of his death have been read into the public record. His private texts, his fears, his love life, all of it exposed in the service of a prosecution that he is not alive to witness. True crime, done honestly, requires us to hold that weight. Not just the procedural drama, not just the legal strategy, not just the bizarre irony of a grief book written by the woman accused of creating the grief, but the actual person who was there and is no longer. Kouri Richins deserved more years. He deserved to see his sons grow up. He deserved to know that the instinct he confided to a friend, that something was very wrong, was correct, and he deserved to have acted on it. We cannot give him any of that, but we can pay attention to what happened to him. The trial is expected to run through late March 2026. The jury will deliberate and return a verdict on charges that carry, if she is convicted of aggravated murder, a mandatory sentence of life in prison. She faces separate charges for mortgage fraud and financial crimes that have not yet gone to trial. Kouri Richins, at 35 years old, is a mother of 3 young boys who are currently being raised without either of their parents present. That is a tragedy independent of guilt or innocence. Those children did not choose any of this. Whatever the jury decides, the questions this case raises will not be answered by a verdict. How does someone plan something like this while living inside a normal life? How does grief become a branding exercise? How does a book about a father's angel wings get written by someone who, according to the state of Utah, created the absence that made the book necessary? There is no neat answer. There is only the trial and the testimony, and eventually a group of 12 people in Summit County who will look at everything and decide what they believe. We will be covering the verdict on this channel the moment it comes in. Before I let you go, drop your city in the comments. I read every single one, and I want to know where this story has reached. And tell me, what do you think the jury will decide? Guilty or not guilty? And what is the piece of evidence that tips you one way or the other? If you are watching this and you haven't subscribed yet, this is the moment. We cover the cases that matter. We do it seriously, and we do not stop until there is a resolution. Because Kouri Richins deserves to have someone paying attention. I'll see you in the next one.